It began with silence. A silence broken not by voices, not by footsteps, but by the low hum of machines circling in the Sahel night. In 12 minutes, Burkina Faso crossed a threshold the world could no longer ignore. For the first time in its history, a drone strike was ordered, confirmed, and defended at the highest level, not by Washington or Paris, but by Ouagadougou itself. What was meant to be a quiet border road became the theater of a demonstration. A convoy vanished into fire and smoke, and with it, the illusion that only global superpowers could command the skies. This was not chaos, it was calculation. And the hand behind it was Ibrahim Traoré, a young leader daring to carve sovereignty into action. The headlines called it shocking. The questions that followed made it seismic. Was this a reckless gamble, or the opening move of a new African doctrine? Could a nation long treated as marginal prove that dignity can be defended with precision and resolve? Do not look away. History is being written tonight. Subscribe and stay with us. The night was meant to be unremarkable. Along the southeastern border of Burkina Faso, the stillness of midnight carried only the sounds of crickets and distant winds. Then almost imperceptibly came the hum, low, mechanical, insistent. Villagers looked to the skies and saw unfamiliar shapes gliding above. The glow of their sensors lit the darkness like watchful eyes. Within moments, the calm gave way to fire. A convoy of vehicles was caught in the crosshairs. No one knew exactly what it carried. No one claimed ownership. Yet the strike fell with surgical precision. By dawn, nothing remained but blackened steel twisted upon itself, the smell of smoke and fuel lingering in the air. It was not the destruction that made the world stop and stare. It was the confirmation that followed. Hours later, from Ouagadougou itself, President Ibrahim Traoré's office admitted what no African head of state had ever dared to say. Yes, the drones had been deployed. Yes, the strike had been deliberate. Yes, the decision had come from the very top. It was not an accident. It was not a rogue commander. It was a demonstration, and the world had to take notice. For decades, the monopoly of drone warfare had rested in the hands of a few. Washington, Paris, London. These capitals had poured billions into fleets of machines that hovered, watched, and struck. Africa had been the terrain, not the pilot. Its skies had been arenas for foreign surveillance. Its ground the theater of others' wars. But that night, the equation shifted. Burkina Faso was no longer simply the backdrop. It had become the actor. The drones were no off-the-shelf machines. Intelligence reports later revealed they were a new breed, nicknamed the NA-7. Designed through clandestine collaboration, they bore the stamp of North Korean prototypes, retrofitted with Russian navigation systems, and adapted for command through the AES network, the joint security system linking Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. In their fusion of hardware and encrypted African command, they became something more than weapons. They became symbols, proof that Africa could innovate, could adapt, could wield technology long monopolized by the West. What startled international observers most was not simply the presence of these drones, but their precision. In just 12 minutes from command to impact, the NA-7 executed its mission without collateral damage, a feat Western drones had rarely achieved in the Sahel. Defense analysts, grudging in their admiration, called it the clean blade of Ouagadougou. For citizens across Burkina Faso, the meaning went beyond military prowess. In the markets of Ouagadougou, in the villages of the Sahel, people whispered that the strike was more than a show of force. It was a declaration that their sovereignty was not rhetorical, but real. Traoré had done what many thought impossible. He had seized the tools of the powerful and turned them into instruments of African defense. Yet even as pride spread through the streets, unease lingered. If the drones were the sword, what was the enemy? Who were the figures in the convoy reduced to ash? Why did fragments of rifles, encrypted radios, and maps later found at the site bear the markings of distant powers? The questions piled higher than the wreckage itself. Burkina Faso had crossed a line, but what lay on the other side was a storm that few could yet see. The true revelation was not in the drones themselves, but in what the convoy was carrying and what it threatened to destroy. When the smoke cleared and investigators combed the wreckage, the story deepened. The convoy was not a line of traders or farmers caught by chance. It was armed, equipped, and prepared for sabotage. Among the ruins lay fragments of American-manufactured rifles, encrypted radios bearing French serial codes, and maps of resource corridors printed in English. Even more unsettling, Identity tags tied to Nigerian operatives were pulled from the debris. This was no random caravan. It was a calculated force. For weeks, whispers had circulated in intelligence circles about something called Operation Broken Spine. Now the pieces came together. Documents recovered from encrypted devices revealed chilling details. The mission had been timed with surgical accuracy. Its target, the Kudugu Oil Refinery, a facility valued at more than $1.3 billion. More than steel, pipes, and machinery, Kudugu was a declaration of independence. Built with partnerships outside the traditional Western sphere, it promised to refine local oil, generate over $400 million annually, and channel revenues into schools, hospitals, and digital infrastructure. To strike it would have been to cripple the spine of Burkina Faso's future. Inside the AES chamber in Ouagadougou, the atmosphere was tense. Phones confiscated, cameras banned. Leaders of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger debated their course. Some argued for diplomacy, fearing that open confrontation might unleash chaos across the Sahel. But Ibrahim Traoré saw only one path. If they send ghosts, he declared, we send thunder. To him, Kudugu was not infrastructure. It was the symbol of a nation learning to stand upright. Allowing it to be broken meant accepting permanent dependency. The drone strike, then, was not reckless aggression. It was a preemptive shield. The convoy had carried not food or medicine, but explosives primed for sabotage. Neutralizing it meant buying the refinery a future, and by extension, securing the dignity of an entire region. Reactions erupted swiftly. In Ouagadougou, citizens filled Independence Square. Banners waved, slogans shouted. This was not war, it was resistance. Similar scenes ignited in Bamako and Niamey, where people saw the strike not as provocation, but as vindication. Social media pulsed with hashtags, Sahel Rising, You Don't Mess with Sovereignty. A remix of Traoré's words over Afrobeat rhythms went viral, turning his declaration into a defiant anthem. But in Western capitals, the mood was far darker. Paris warned of reckless destabilization. Washington urged restraint, its carefully worded statements signaling unease but avoiding outright condemnation. Financial markets trembled. Analysts whispered that if such actions spread, billions of dollars in contracts across the Sahel could unravel overnight. The confrontation had moved beyond borders. To Africa's streets, Traoré was a leader refusing submission. To Western chancelleries, he was unpredictable, dangerous. Yet behind the chants and headlines, deeper shadows loomed. Who had funded the operation? Who commanded the mercenaries? And above all, who was the mysterious figure whispered in the files only as the DC handler? In the days that followed the strike, the streets of Ouagadougou became a theater of transformation. Murals appeared overnight depicting drones not as symbols of foreign domination, but as guardians of sovereignty. Street vendors sold T-shirts emblazoned with defiant slogans. Poets, musicians, and filmmakers wove the midnight strike into art, transforming an act of defense into a cultural awakening. What had begun as 12 minutes of fire had ignited a movement. The Kudugu refinery, still weeks away from full operation, now stood as more than a facility. It was a promise. Projected to generate $400 million annually, its revenues were earmarked not for foreign shareholders, but for domestic priorities: classrooms, hospitals, digital hubs. For the first time in decades, many Burkinabe believed that their resources might serve their own future, rather than enrich distant capitals. The drone strike had, in their eyes, defended not just steel and concrete, but the hope of self-determination. Politically, the impact was seismic. For years, foreign commentators had painted African states as fragile, incapable of decisive action. Traoré's decision shattered that narrative. He became a symbol not only for his own people, but for neighbors across the Sahel. In Bamako, Niamey, and even as far as Dakar, young people rallied with chants that sovereignty was not negotiable. A new confidence pulsed through the region. The belief that small states could act, and act decisively, against hidden hands. Yet pride was accompanied by peril. Western media framed the strike as reckless, a provocation that could isolate Burkina Faso diplomatically and economically. Policy institutes in Paris warned that investment would flee. In Washington, analysts debated whether to sanction the AES bloc or to engage it cautiously. The balance of risks and opportunities had shifted, and no one could predict where it might land. Within Burkina Faso, however, the calculus was different. Citizens weighed the immediate dangers against the long history of dependency. For decades, resources had left the soil cheaply, only to return as expensive imports. The refinery represented a break in that cycle. To defend it was to defend dignity, Traore's government framed the strike not as aggression, but as necessity, a coup against covert manipulation, a refusal to kneel to economic sabotage. It was here that international observers began to call the decision the Ibrahim Traoré Coup, not merely in the military sense, but as a political act of defiance against an entrenched order. Still, questions lingered. Could such defiance endure when sanctions tightened, when markets turned cold, when covert retaliation intensified? Could a young government bear the weight of standing alone against powers whose reach extended into finance, media, and diplomacy? The people for now answered with faith. Tens of thousands poured into squares, waving flags and singing songs that blended hope with defiance. For them, the choice was stark: sovereignty or silence, dignity or dependency. But as celebrations echoed through the Sahel, whispers in foreign capitals grew louder. Would this rising pride be allowed to flourish, or would it be crushed before it could take root? Far beyond the borders of the Sahel, the drone strike reverberated like a tremor through the corridors of power. In Washington, officials issued a cautious statement urging restraint and dialogue, words that masked deep unease. Analysts debated whether the incident signaled a dangerous escalation or a strategic masterstroke. For the first time, the United States had to reckon with the fact that a small West African nation had deployed advanced technology in ways neither America nor France had achieved in the region. Paris, by contrast, was blunt. The French Foreign Ministry condemned the strike as reckless, claiming it undermined regional stability. Headlines in French newspapers warned of an unpredictable Traoré and the fire of a destabilized Africa. For a country long accustomed to influence in the Sahel, the spectacle of an assertive Burkina Faso was unsettling. The European Union echoed these concerns, portraying the AES bloc's actions as the dawn of chaos. NATO officials, while more restrained, hinted at growing anxiety over Moscow and Beijing's fingerprints on emerging African defense systems. To the Western establishment, the drone strike was not simply about Burkina Faso. It was a signal of shifting alliances that threatened old hierarchies. But across Africa, the interpretation was different. In Guinea, transitional authorities sent observers to AES meetings, intrigued by the boldness of the Iron Shield alliance. The Central African Republic expressed readiness to align, while even Chad acknowledged that a collective defense doctrine could help stabilize its borders. What outsiders painted as instability, many Africans saw as self-reliance. This divergence of perspectives underscored the heart of the matter. To Western powers, sovereignty defended through force threatened contracts worth billions and security frameworks built over decades. To African citizens, the same sovereignty represented dignity reclaimed. The term whispered in rallies and debates captured it succinctly: the Burkina Faso Revolution. Yet the world's applause and condemnation alike could not answer the looming question. Could a revolution born in fire withstand the sanctions, cyber strikes, and covert campaigns that were surely on their way? From the ashes of a single convoy, a doctrine was born. The drone strike was not left as an isolated incident. It became the foundation of what is now called the Sahel Doctrine. Its essence was simple, yet uncompromising. Any foreign force operating without transparency, without registration, without coordination, would be treated as hostile, neutralized, and exposed before the world. At the heart of this new framework stood Operation Iron Shield, the collective defense mechanism uniting Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. Encrypted communication lines linked capitals that had once struggled in isolation. Drones and fighter jets now patrolled under a shared flag. Intelligence once fragmented was pooled into AESnet, a network designed to detect threats before they struck. What had been dreams of unity became hard policy. For ordinary citizens, the symbolism was transformative. No longer was security subcontracted to foreign armies. No longer was sovereignty dependent on advisors flown in from Paris or Washington. In markets, in classrooms, in village squares, people began to speak of dignity with wings, the belief that Africans could defend their own skies, their own borders, their own futures. But with pride came peril. Western think tanks warned that Iron Shield threatened to dismantle existing security frameworks dominated by France and the United States. Investors whispered that if such doctrines spread, contracts worth billions could be renegotiated under African terms. Sanctions, cyber attacks, covert destabilization. These were the storms many feared would follow. Yet Traoré and his allies insisted the cost of submission was higher still. Better to risk confrontation than to live forever on borrowed power. Better to stand and face the tempest than to bow beneath its shadow. The path forward is uncertain. Will Iron Shield prove resilient under pressure, inspiring a continent-wide reawakening? Or will it fracture under the relentless push of those who profit from division? Perhaps the real question is not whether the Sahel can hold its shield, but whether the rest of Africa will dare to build one of its own. The midnight drone strike was more than an act of defense. It was a statement carved into history. Ibrahim Traoré's words echoed across the continent. Fear is for those who borrow power. We build ours. In a dozen minutes, Burkina Faso had transformed from a peripheral observer into a nation capable of asserting its own rules, defending its own sovereignty, and inspiring a new generation to believe that dignity could be codified into policy. The lessons extended beyond borders. In Mali, Niger, and beyond, citizens and leaders alike saw the possibility of collective self-reliance. The Iron Shield was no longer an abstract plan, but a concrete example of what could be achieved when courage, coordination, and conviction converge. For the first time, Africa could envision a future in which its resources, its decisions, and its destiny were determined by its own hands, not by the interests of distant capitals. Yet the world watches closely. Western powers, accustomed to shaping outcomes from afar, now face the reality of a continent willing to stand firm. Markets, security experts, and diplomats alike calculate new risks, knowing that assertive strategies such as the Ibrahim Traoré Coup could ripple far beyond Burkina Faso's borders. Still, amid the uncertainty, hope endures. The Burkina Faso Revolution stands as a beacon, proof that even small nations can wield influence, that sovereignty is more than rhetoric, and that the collective will of a people can challenge centuries of dependency. Students repeat the mantra in classrooms. Farmers speak of it in fields. Traders see it in the markets. Across the Sahel, a new confidence takes root. No sovereignty, no future. The question now is for all Africans to consider. Will this red line, drawn with courage and conviction, reshape the future of an entire continent? Can the model of unity, vigilance, and self-defense endure against the pressures it will inevitably face? History is unfolding, and the answer rests not in distant capitals, but in the hearts and actions of those who refuse to be defined by others. If you believe sovereignty matters, share this story and stand with us. Subscribe now. History is not waiting.